To first understand why such a mainstream gratifying sport seems to hate royalty as much as an 18th century Frenchman, we need to understand its origins. Tennis as we know it today can be traced back to the 12th century game of
Jeu de palme,
or Game of the Palm, which originated in France, was played anywhere, and then eventually moved indoors by the higher classes, and was also played without rackets, which would not be introduced to the 15th century, hence the name, the Game of the Palm. It eventually became known as tennis in English, and eventually real tennis, after the game of lawn tennis became more popular. Jeu de palme, much like the modern day sport, involved sending a ball, in our case a utoff, from one side of the room over a net or rope to the other side of the room. Jeu de palme was usually much like the regular tennis of today, played one-on-one or in teams of two. The game became so popular in France that the French had to create rules as to who could play and when, which included only allowing the common people to play on a Sunday, so that tennis wouldn't distract traders from their work. By the 15th century, only nobility had the ability to play whenever they felt like it. A little fun fact related to
jeu de palme,
is when the craze eventually spread to England, the English were as always irritated by the French, not wholly because of the game itself, but because of France's infatuation with the sport. It is said that Sir Robert Dallington stated that they were all born with a racket in their hand. Jeu de palme was played in courts called
jeu carré,
which were built at most aristocratic French accommodations. Now, after that introduction to the sport that killed kings, we will discover how it was so deadly. Starting with Louis X, the first person to build an indoors jeu de palme court, so he could play his favourite sport throughout the year. And by favourite sport, I mean his favourite sport. This man was obsessed with tennis, like his utoff was filled with cocaine. He loved it probably more than his wife. After a particularly physically straining game in the June of 1316, Louis became severely dehydrated. And to resolve this issue, as any true king of the French would, he downed an entire urn of cooled wine, and subsequently died at the age of 26. The true cause of Louis' death may have been alcohol poisoning, a pre-existing condition or heat stroke, but we do know that Louis' obsession with tennis caused his death, and as far as I'm aware, no French monarchs have died due to drug addictions, meaning an addiction to tennis is more deadly than an addiction to drugs if you're French royalty. And due to Louis' lack of male heirs, this would eventually cause the 100 Years' War and roughly 2.3 million deaths. The next murderous strike of tennis happened in 1437 to King James I of Scotland, a man of, let's just say, an overall spherical form. Good old James supposedly played tennis to keep his waistline in check. The problem was that King James kept losing his tennis balls down a sewer drain, so James boarded it up. However, a mere 3 days later, King James heard a group of assassins enter his home, and so James lifted the floorboards and tried to escape through the sewers, hoping to escape the murderous intent of his assailants. However, his escape attempt was foiled by the very drain he had boarded up, so King James was trapped and promptly murdered, adding another tally to the royal death toll of tennis. Now let's speedrun through more tennis-related deaths, starting with King Charles VIII of France, who was very excited for a game of tennis, ran through a castle to reach the court, hit his head, and died hours later. Next, in 1751, Frederick, the Prince of Wales, died of a lung abscess, which the doctor blamed on a tennis ball that had hit the prince in the torso. In 1536, Anne Boleyn, the second wife of famous sports fan Henry VIII, was watching a tennis match just before she was informed about her upcoming execution. And to add insult to injury, while Anne Boleyn was being beheaded, King Henry VIII was supposedly busy with other important duties, including a casual game of tennis, which brings the sport's death toll to a whopping 4 monarchs. No one knows why tennis hates royalty, or when it will strike again. But what we have learned is tennis hates French aristocrats, has had a history longer than my arm, and is possibly more addictive than drugs. And so, that is how tennis killed the King of France and other aristocrats. Thanks for watching.